The views and comments expressed on the Space Show by its guests, callers, and listeners belong to them. The Space Show and its hosts serve only as a platform and are not responsible for others' comments or views. All topics discussed on the Space Show are primarily for educational purposes.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they're easy, but because they are hard.
Start. 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's the Space Show with Dr. David Livingston. Broadcasting for 7 continents, consistently bringing you quality news and interviews with the best and brightest minds in the new space economy. Here is the founder and host of the Space Show, the man who best articulates the vision of space commercial enterprise, Dr. David Livingston.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome to our Tuesday evening Space Show program. That's Tuesday evening California time. I'm your host, David Livingston, and thank you very much for tuning in. We go international on the Space Show tonight with a program I think you're going to find very interesting and inspiring. But first, a couple of very quick announcements that I want to make. Because of the Memorial Day holiday, there is no Sunday Space Show, so we do have a program Friday. And then our next Space Show program will be the following Tuesday. And hopefully everybody will have a good holiday weekend, a safe and healthy holiday weekend. But we do have Hotel Mars tomorrow. Of course, that's pre-recorded. And that's on Russian space tourism with Marcia Smith of Space Policy Online. And then our Friday Space Show program. The next one is we're 60-minute program tonight. And we will go out a little longer if you're sending in emails or giving us a call. But do pay attention to the clock. And remember, we're a talk show, so that means we like to talk. And our toll-free number for you to call, 1-866-687-7223. One more quick announcement, and that is for those of you that like to look at the night sky. Tonight is one of those nights that you should go look at the night sky. There is a blood red moon and a lunar eclipse. So I know it's visible in northern and southern California. For me in northern California, the eclipse totals at 4:14 a.m. California time. I'm planning to get up and see it starting at about 3:45 if the skies are clear here. That's always a big if. And I'm not sure what time it'll be in Los Angeles, but it'll be a few minutes different if you're listening in Southern California. And if you're on the East Coast, I'm not sure it's visible for you, but Google it for lunar eclipse blood red moon the morning of May 26th. And if it is visible for you, I would really encourage you to go check it out. It's going to be really unique, especially if you've got a clear view of it. And to me, of course, it's worth getting up that time in the morning just to go see it. So going back to the Space Show, a couple of other quick announcements. Once again, our toll-free number, and I'll tell you when I open the phone lines up, 1-866-687-7223. Email drspace, DRSPACE, at thespaceshow.com. Plus, you can post comments or ask questions on our blog, which is thespaceshow.com, all the way to the far right to the upcoming show menu, and you will see the first show with Lisa Labonte. Scroll to the bottom, and you'll see an area where you can post your comments or ask your questions. And as soon as you do that and hit the send button, I will be able to integrate it into our discussion tonight. Our newsletter for the week is posted upper right corner of our homepage. Remember, everything we do is archived. Don't forget we have a store, and Pepper takes you to our store. If you click on her picture listening to the Space Show, that's how you get to our LogoWare store. Everything we do is archived, so you can listen right off of our website, quickly download the shows because they're not large file sizes. And then also we podcast, and we're in most podcast servers and iTunes, of course. So hopefully you won't have any problem finding our podcast, but we're always open to your suggestions. And then we do want to announce again, as always, we're listener supported. We're a 501c3 nonprofit with One Giant Leap Foundation. Listeners just like you support the Space Show and enable us to have these great kinds of programs and great guests like the one I'm going to introduce to you in just a few minutes. So the best way to support us is PayPal. There is a large PayPal button at the top of our homepage. For those of you that want to do checks, we do accept them, and we do get mail in the U.S. mail. Believe it or not, it still does arrive. And you can make the checks payable to 1 ONE Giant Leap Foundation, and they mail to Box 95, Tiburon, Tiburon, California, 94920. But again, PayPal's the easiest if you are fine doing e-transactions. And once again, your support enables these kinds of programs. Because we're on the 60-minute program, I just want to mention that we do have sponsors, and they operate the banner ads going across our homepage, which they can change whenever they want. And this is a shorter format show, so I simply shout out to our great sponsors, Northrop Grumman, the Space Foundation, Astrox, AIAA, Moonwards, Celestis, and the National Space Society. And if you want to connect to any of these sponsors or have any questions or want to inquire, please let me know, and I'll be glad to connect you with my contacts with all of these great sponsors. We would not be doing the Space Show without them, and we thank them for their support. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please email me at drspace@thespaceshow.com. Our guest today, for the first time, we welcome Lisa Labonte to the program. And she has many different educational degrees that may come up on the show tonight, but she's an MBA in international business, plus quite a few others. She was raised in Silicon Valley, just a little bit south of where I am. She got her MBA in 1996. She also holds an MS in Internet Strategy and Tech Management, a BA in Poli-Sci. She's been involved in a 25-plus global year of business, and she has maintained a focus in tech, finance, and education and strategic advisory and marketing. She's a manager director role in different sovereign wealth funds, and since 2007, she has invested in the creation of enterprises that grow and sustain positive and economic impact. You can see all of this and follow it and read more about it at her website, which is Lisa Labonte, Labonte. So it's LisaLabonte.com. And then just click on the career part. She's traveled to 72 nations, worked in 21 of them. She speaks Japanese and other languages as well. She is currently pursuing an additional degree. And she started an NGO, which I will let her tell you about, which has been pretty amazing and deals directly with space. Lisa, welcome to the Space Show, and it's great to have you on for the first time. How are you?
Thank you, David. I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
With this background, how did you get an interest in space? And you were way ahead of your time in creating the Middle Eastern NGO Arab Youth Venture Foundation, which has a lot to do with STEM and space. So what gave you your background or your interest or your love for space?
Sure, that's interesting. That actually occurred when I was in New York City, and a sports agency actually asked me to advise and look into the prospects for the Rocket Racing League for the Middle East, and that was in 2007. And so that sort of put me on this path where I just kind of dug into the research and was looking at, this brand new league, and it was, rocket related, and some of the big space pioneers, Pete Diamandis and a couple of others, were engaged in this. And so from there, it just became something that I became intrigued with and started looking at the region, the Middle East region. I was living in Dubai already. I had just left the Dubai government and was looking to do something new and trying to figure out what my next steps were. And it all sort of just came together one night staring out at the moon and, realizing that there was an absolute dearth of programming for not just youth, but, the society in general around space, and that this was a burgeoning industry for the region and the region's goals, the GCC in particular, the 6 nations in the Arabian Gulf. the mandate really was to help diversify economies away from oil and gas. And so we were looking at the burgeoning industries, and space was certainly one of them. And so it just all sort of came together, and as a Silicon Valley raised technology investor and entrepreneur, I had it in me to kind of take that risk and jump off the pier, so to speak.
What brought you to Dubai in the first place?
Opportunity. Again, in all the good ways of that, good meanings of that word, I had lived in Bahrain in the mid-'90s, worked in the finance sector as a consultant in the mid-'90s, and I was in Oman and Syria, Damascus back then, and also in Dubai for a brief time in the mid-'90s. And so I liked it back then. It was a very different place back then. And I never really forgot about the region. And as the region started picking up steam and was starting to make some new movements, I thought that it might be time to go back and look and see what was going on. And so I went back to Dubai in 2002, 2004, and then finally in 2005, I packed up and moved over and ended up working for the Dubai government first, and then left and started my NGO after.
Do you also speak Arabic like you do Japanese?
No, I don't speak Arabic, unfortunately.
And space has really changed since the Rocket Racing League days, going back to 2000. Yes. And I would imagine the opportunities have really changed. And what caught the attention of this as a good diversification away from oil and gas? Because it's not necessarily a cash flow producing industry, at least it wasn't back then.
Right, and so I think that the way that I was looking at it back then, it wasn't necessarily space, that there was a lot going on with avionics and aerospace and also satellites. So, that's something that if you want to look at the UAE space industry now, I mean, you've got two, factions here that are working in unison, but are very different. And so you've got the Dubai-based Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, which officially launched in 2015. However, they merged with EAST, which was back in the day the Emirates Institution for Advanced Science and Technology, and EAST was responsible early on from 2006. They were doing a lot of satellite development and work, and so there was a lot of things going on, and there was a few implications for civil defense and things like that. But there were, a few things, satellites and aerospace and some avionics and things that sort of did make sense for diversification. And so it wasn't pure space, it wasn't exploration by any stretch of the imagination, but we knew that one day it might be, right? And so here we are. And so, the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center is the entity that actually initiated the Emirates Mars mission and the HOPE probe. And so, that's one faction. And then you've got the UAE Space Agency, which is different, but related, obviously, under the mandate of growing this space sector in the country. So it's wonderful. That also launched officially in 2015. And so between the two of them, they've got different mandates and different things they're working on, but everything is, in unison ultimately, the ultimate goals. And I can't speak to their goals. I'm in the private sector, but they're doing some wonderful things. And perhaps I can mention what they've been up to with the HOPE probe, if anyone's interested in that.
Sure, because we followed it completely, and and its launch and everything. So, what are some of the facts and the situations behind the HOPE probe?
All right. So first of all, I'm not a scientist, nor am I, I'm not a mathematician, a scientist, or an engineer. So I'm an entrepreneur, and I'll give you the best that I've got and all that I've got. But
okay.
The Emirates Mars mission, basically it's the HOPE mission or the Mars mission, and it's a probe. Obviously, we know that it's a probe. It's an orbiter. It was basically created to be the first. Of course, Dubai likes to do things first and big, and go big whenever they do something. And so it was really, it aimed to be the first probe that would go to Mars to take complete pictures of the Martian atmosphere and all of its layers, and particularly looking at the loss of hydrogen and oxygen gases into space. And so that's what the HOPE probe aims to do, is to take photos, to take pictures of those things and send them back to Earth, and so that the UAE can then collaborate and share those images. And it's the first to have those types of images. So that's very interesting. It was launched last year in, I believe it was July. It launched out of Japan in collaboration with JAXA. It got a ride on one of JAXA's rockets, I guess. And it finally, I guess it took about, a few months. It landed, or it didn't land, I'm sorry. It got to Mars. It's an orbiter, so it's not landing.
Right.
It got to Mars in February this year. And so it's orbiting. It is not landing. A lot of people think that it's landed, or it's a rover. It's not a rover. It's not a lander. It is a orbiter. It's a probe. So it's orbiting the red planet now, and it's scheduled to orbit the red planet for 1 Martian year. And if no one knows what a Martian year is, that's basically, it's a little bit less than 2 years. 1 Martian year is 687 Earth days. So that's a Martian year. And that's how long it's going to be up there. And they've already begun now taking pictures. So the HOPE probe, which HOPE in Arabic is Amal. And so Amal and the HOPE probe have started to take pictures now, and they're starting to send them back to Earth. So that's very exciting, and we can't wait to see what they come back with. Maybe some have seen them already.
Interesting. So, but before all of this happened, you were ahead of the time because you started your NGO, the Arab Youth Venture Foundation, which was, I guess, heavily STEM-oriented, right, and had some focus on space, and people were interested, I guess, right?
Right. So when I was looking out the window at the moon that day in 2007, that night, and, realized that maybe I should just jump in and do something, there's a lot of talk always in every market. There's a lot of talk about what people should be doing, or what the goals are and what the dreams are of different things. But a lot of times nothing tends to happen. A lot of times things just don't seem to work out for whatever reasons. And so I had been listening to a lot of media and a lot of speeches and a lot of talk about building a knowledge economy in the Middle East, and wasn't seeing much in the way of translated action. And so I decided that I would do something, and what I would do was I was going to build this NGO focused on STEM, but also focused on emotional intelligence and building creativity and innovative spirits within the cultural confines of the region. And using STEM, I was using space actually as the hook to get more engaged students and youth and parents and teachers and the whole communities engaged in STEM by way of space. And so I used space sort of as that hook to spur the imagination, realizing that, I could use dinosaurs, or I could use, race cars, or I could use space. And I decided that the Rocket Racing League sort of was in my head, and I thought, we'll use space, and we'll see if that works. And it really worked. It really worked really well. It was obviously, space is extremely inspirational to everybody, no matter how old you are. And so it was one of those things that really took off, and we had our early support and our largest support was from Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi was very much, very keen and very, very supportive of all of the efforts for the, space education, outreach, workforce development. And Abu Dhabi had been really spearheading for many years a lot of high-tech training in their K-12 schools. And so they were really keen to be able to tap into this type of thing as well. And, a lot of people don't know this about Abu Dhabi and the UAE in particular, but since Abu Dhabi has the most, the oil, they really have done over the years, many decades, since the 70s, and even before that, but really gearing up from the 70s. They have been very adept at a lot of technologies that even in the U.S., and you're in California,
right.
California is horrific track record in desalinization, for example. And so because of the oil and gas industry, the UAE is far ahead, and Abu Dhabi in particular, very far ahead in terms of a lot of technological advances in some of these renewable energy or gray water recycling or some of these things that are very they're just amazingly ahead of their time. And so, they actually were turning out very large numbers of engineering students. And the engineering students were feeding the oil and gas industry. And so over the years, you've got a very strong base of STEM in the UAE within the professionals and within the students you see now. It's just a very, very strong turnout of skill sets when it comes to STEM in particular. So that was something we were able to build on. The problem that I saw that we were trying to solve was the disconnect between the enormous amount of skill in, these hard skills of STEM with the soft skills of emotional intelligence or some of the creativity or some of the things that they had a lot of creativity, but there was a lack of maybe discipline, or there were just some things that were, on the emotional intelligence side that really needed to be tweaked or improved. And so the idea was to sort of create these, super kids that would actually be, very well groomed and very well skilled to be able to serve those industries that we were looking at way down the road that were going to be the key industries, 5, 10, 20 years later, which now is 14 years later, whether it's renewable energy or cybersecurity or, space or some of these other industries like fintech and other things that are now really starting to grow. These kids are now really poised because they've got a really strong STEM background. And so, that was our goal, was to support the efforts of the nation in a way that we could as the private sector, as the innovative force, as an unencumbered and agile entity that, I funded the NGO myself to begin with, and then we had great funding, as I mentioned, from Abu Dhabi and great support from U.S. defense contractors as well. And we were able to, make those decisions in an agile fashion and get things done and move and really put things into the marketplace that were extremely unique and highly effective and very high profile and very newsworthy as well. And so we were putting UAE on the map globally for space by sending a 19-year-old Emirati young woman to the Geophysics Union in San Francisco to speak to 6,000 adult, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds about remote sensing. And it was like, people were looking at her and going, who is she? And, where is she from? And it's like, she's from Dubai, as an example. So we were able to do those things, and they weren't done on, by accident. They were all highly strategic things that fed the future. So, you give the kids the skills, give them NASA internships, give them access, give them the ability to go and travel and be at a conference that's a global conference where they can meet their peers, where they can meet people who are, much, much more experienced and much more, tapped into the marketplace. To be able to, put that out there was a very important aspect of the NGO. I mean, there was a whole strategy, a deep strategy around this NGO, and it wasn't just about, let's do some space training and things like this. It was, let's really look at this and put this together so that we actually feed the future and feed the pipeline for these burgeoning sectors of the economy that are going to be requiring, human capital, and human capital that can hit the ground running, and human capital that's local and that are, UAE nationals, and not keep feeding the expat, this expat, market, that they bring in people because nobody local knows about XYZ. So now we're changing the dynamic. And so we started to do that 14 years ago in 2007, and we've been doing it ever since.
So I have an email question for you, and I have a caller on hold. Todd is in San Diego with the email question, and he says, can these students go out of country and work in the space industry or the entrepreneurial space industry in the United States or other countries? Can they stay? Are they required to return to the Middle East? What can you say about what the students can do and how they can manage their careers?
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Great question. So, of course, the students are free to do whatever they like to do for the most part. Now, with a caveat, so if you are a student that is sponsored by a company, so in the UAE, they're very generous with a lot of their benefits and things, and education is one of the largest things that they are the government is extremely keen on it, and they're extremely generous. And so if you are being sponsored by, let's say, a company, let's say DEWA, the Dubai Electric Company, to go and do a master's degree at an MBA at Harvard, for example, then they will say to you, which is very typical, you've got to come back to the UAE and work for so many years, and then then you're free to do what you like to do. So that's, I think, common in many places when it comes to someone sponsoring your education. But other than that, absolutely, it's just, if they are a woman, they may have, family will weigh in on that decision, but or may not weigh in. Just depends on the family. But absolutely, they're free to go and do whatever they want to do if they wanted to. UAE is a wonderful place to live, so a lot of people tend to like to stay there. But certainly, if they had the inclination and interest in working for a space company in America, absolutely, that would be fantastic.
Let me see who your caller is. Good evening, caller. Who are you and where are you? Please, thank you for calling.
Yeah, this is Marshall in Oklahoma.
Okay.
And
hi, Marshall.
Yes. While you were talking earlier, it reminded me of a question that came up a couple of weeks ago, and I never got to ask anybody. So, tag, you're it. And the question is, what does a country like Dubai or the United Arab Emirates think about Elon Musk and the Starlink system coming in there and, providing internet service? Are they looking to capitalize on it, or are they going to be like the Red Chinese and, how do we stop it?
That's a great question. I can't speak to the UAE government's intentions or interests at all, but I can say that, I know that they like Elon Musk. I could say also that Dubai is not a country, only the UAE is a nation. But, they have, Elon Musk was just over, well, now it's been 4 years. Elon Musk was a guest speaker in Dubai in 2017. He's got, they're working on some Hyperloop system, and I'm not sure whose it is, but, they're working on that. They hold Elon Musk, I think, in high regard from everything I've heard and seen. So I don't really know what they have as far as intentions for their satellite or the Starlink system. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Well, I was thinking a lot of those bright young people could sure make a buck by properly programming to use Starlink and then making sure everybody gets connected up. Sound like a very good business.
I guess. I don't know. They probably have competition for Starlink, for all I know. But anything else, Marshall?
No, not this evening. That'll be enough for me.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marshall.
I appreciate your call. Listeners, Marshall cleared the telephone line, and if you would like to call and talk to our guest, it is 1-866-687-7223. You mentioned that Dubai is not a country. I mean, this is going to maybe sound a little stupid to you, but can you, for the benefit of listeners who maybe aren't familiar with the Middle East or as familiar or as geographically prone as maybe we would think they are, can you explain the Emirates and Dubai and the geography real quickly?
Sure.
I know that's pretty basic, but
all right, so,
I hope you don't mind doing it.
No, not at all. Let's do a 30,000 foot, and let's go down from there.
Okay.
So there are 22 Arabic-speaking countries in the world, and they're largely in Africa and the Middle East, right?
Right.
So they're in the Africa and the Middle East. There are obviously different areas. So you've got the North Africa. You find countries like Algeria and Morocco and things like that, and then you've got Levant, which you've got Jordan and Lebanon and Palestine, if you will, and then you've got the Arabian Gulf. You've got the 6 nations in the Arabian Gulf. You've got Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and of course you've got the UAE. And the UAE, if you drill down, is made up of, it's a constitutional monarchy made up of 7 emirates. And of those 7 emirates, Dubai, you've got Dubai, which is has gotten a lot more press coverage, but the largest, Abu Dhabi, is the federal seat of government, and Abu Dhabi is where the space agency is located, and the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, the Hope probe, the parental entity of the Hope probe is in Dubai, and then you've got 5 other emirates, which I can name if you like, but basically that's sort of the structure, and because Dubai is so well known, sometimes people think it's a country, but it's not. It's part of the 7 emirates of the UAE, United Arab Emirates.
Okay, and I've never been, but I would like to be. I'd like to go there, and I understand their infrastructure and airports and things are to make people in the United States envious because we're not as modern and as up to date as a lot of the infrastructure is there. And they made it to Mars their very first time, and and China landed on Mars their very first time. So maybe it's getting easier to go to Mars. I don't know.
Well, that would be nice. Elon Musk would be happy if that were the case.
Well, he may find it's pretty easy to get there, but he may find some political issues with planetary protection that might make it a little bit more challenging. That remains to be seen. Do you see space continuing to be a big driver in the Middle East and in the areas that you have experience in, or is it going to sort of peter out or taper off or stabilize?
Oh, gosh, no. It's growing. It's absolutely growing. And as a matter of fact, there are now space agencies in every one of the GCC nations. So, there are Bahrain has a space agency, Saudi Arabia has a space agency. They've all got space agencies now, and they're all in their nascent stages. UAE is further along, but there are space agencies in other Arab nations as well. But now the GCC, which is the oil-rich region, they all are, now getting into space in different, they're at different levels, each of them, but they're all very new and very young. And so, the UAE Space Agency, as we mentioned, and the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, they're only going into their 60th year officially. And of course, the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, they've been doing their satellite work for 15 years now, going on 15 years. So, there's some movement, and it's not going to stop. It's going to get, I think, much more popular.
Do the people, the general citizens, do they have a high interest in space? Is it something that they really care about and they know about?
I think that, from what we've been doing, we've been doing our work for 14 years, and we worked with ages 6 years old to 26 years old. That is our quote-unquote youth range. And we've had over 103 nationalities and now over 5 million that we've impacted and worked with. And so, youth that have come through our programs or been with our initiatives that we've launched, and we operate in 11 countries specifically. So we don't just operate in the UAE, but we've always had interest. I mean, space is just one of those things. I think it's one of the reasons why I really liked it at the beginning, because I saw it as that hook that would really inspire people and engage them and get them to kind of take notice and participate. And so that has been the case since 2007, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. And with UAE's success with Amal, the Hope probe, I see it just getting, just much more popular as the time goes by.
Linda is in Denver and sent in a note that says, what are your thoughts for human spaceflight in the region, either in the form of space tourism or as part of a national program to have national astronauts?
Oh, great question, Linda. Well, as you know, the UAE sent up its first astronaut last year, and so that's happening. And now they've got a joint venture with NASA, and the UAE is training astronauts now. We call them Najmonauts. Najmonaut is an Arab astronaut, just like a cosmonaut or a taikonaut. Najmonaut, Najm means star. So Najmonauts are astronauts, but NASA is now training the UAE's astronauts at Johnson Space Center in Houston. So that just kicked off that agreement, and now I believe that the training is underway already for that. So I imagine that's going to get better and better as well. And there'll be, the next crew that they choose, very well could be an Emirati up at the space station for more than a week, more than a month, more than 6 months. Hopefully it'll be something quite compelling. As for space tourism, definitely, I remember back in the day, 2009, maybe 10, Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic got a huge amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars from an Abu Dhabi sovereign, I believe it was a sovereign wealth.
Correct, yeah, $250 million.
Fund. And, so Richard Branson was poking around early on, and I think that the others have been for many years. There was supposed to be a space port put in. There have been many, again, this goes back to what I was mentioning before, a lot of talks, a lot of discussions, a lot of dreams, a lot of big things that are awesome and would be great, but for some reason or another, and we don't ever usually always know all the real reasons, things don't materialize. And so I remember when I launched 2007, the foundation, my NGO, I launched it in a small little emirate because in that emirate, the same time we were launching, there was supposed to be the first space camp partnered with the space camp out of Huntsville was supposed to be launching as well. And also they were going to put the spaceport there. So I went and I said, well, if they're going to put a spaceport there and this is where the space camp's going to go, I better launch our NGO here. And that's why we launched there. And so neither one of those things ever materialized back then. And so, sometimes things are too far ahead of their time, right? Like the Rocket Racing League, even in America, it was just too ahead of its time. And you find that with a lot of things. When you're too ahead, sometimes not a positive. And, we know that in the venture world. And so this is what's happened. Now things are catching up. Things are really, the market is really heating up and people are getting more and more comfortable. They're making more investments. They're venturing out of their comfort zone and getting into this thing, which is, what is this? What is space exploration all about? What are all these different types of applications for space? And, we're also finding the UAE, I believe, I can't speak to what their goals are, but of course, defense is something that you'd want to be looking at space for as well. And I know that we've got communication satellites that are from the UAE, and we've also got imaging satellites, right? So there are lots of things going on, and the imaging and the communication satellites have been in motion in the UAE for 14, 15 years as well. So they're not new. They've been around. And, I think that the market's going to be growing substantially, and it's not going to stop.
Now,
I can't imagine.
When I was looking over some of the material you sent me, and you mentioned Najmonauts, you had a role in creating that term, correct?
Yes, so that was coined for the public domain, and it was coined with an Emirati scientist who is, she graduated from Cambridge. She was a historic NASA research fellow from the UAE. As many people may not know, the UAE was the first to ever have official NASA interns at NASA, and that was made possible through an International Space Act agreement that I forged with NASA in 2009. And we paid for everything. It was a reimbursable Space Act agreement, so we had to pay NASA for everything. So we were paying NASA in a twist. We were paying NASA for all of everything that we did, and we were sending a limited number of very high potential Emirati to work at NASA for 2 to 10 months. And Majd was one of them, and she worked on, I wonder if she worked on earthquake prediction models using remote sensing, I believe. I might be wrong about that, but she was working on something quite high-end and ended up doing her PhD in photonics at Cambridge. And so Majd graduated from Cambridge, the first Emirati to ever graduate in the physics field from Cambridge. And she graduated at age 24, I believe, in her mid-20s, she graduated from Cambridge with her PhD. So, these are the caliber of I call them kids, but they're not kids. They're young professionals, and they are very dynamic. And this is the caliber of what's coming out of the UAE. And so Majd and I coined that together because I told you I don't speak Arabic. So I gave her the prompts. I said, I want to know what are the words for universe and stars, and I said, I want 6 words, and I gave it to Majd, and I gave it to 3 other Arabic speakers, and I put it all together with, I compiled all of the responses, and then I kind of compiled it together and spoke to Majd about it, and I said, what should we do? And together we did this. So yeah, we coined a new word, but it's in the public domain. It's not our word. It's a word that people are using now, and schools are doing a lot of space art around it, and they're doing space videos for physical fitness. It's wonderful. They're doing all kinds of cool things around the whole pride of having Arab astronauts. And so this whole Najmonaut idea is slowly but surely, I think, taking off.
I have another email, and I know you don't speak for any government or any emirate, so you can answer this question any way you want, but I think he's hoping that you speak for the government over there, but that's not the case, listener. But anyway, this is John in Las Vegas, and he says, does your guest have any idea what the relationship is between Jordan and the UAE with regards to space pursuits? Do you think that space could be a venue to improve relations between the two entities? Do they have any intentions of sharing efforts in space?
Oh, great question. Well, again, I cannot speak to any of those things, except I can say, and I will say, that the UAE and Jordan have historically had a very good relationship. As a matter of fact, they've had joint funds and different things over the years. Excuse me. And so I don't know, but I would imagine that would be a great idea and one that they've probably already thought of.
I've not ever heard of Jordan having much to do with space. I can't add anything to John's question. I don't have any knowledge of that. So, and then he has a follow-up question: is space now, and is it going to be and again, John, she doesn't speak for the government, is going to be a military or civilian priority for the UAE, and how do they determine their budget for space? So I'm not sure you can answer these questions.
No, but let's go back to Jordan for 1 second.
Okay.
So, John, going back to Jordan, great question, and I don't know if Jordan has thought about a space agency or what they're doing, but I can tell you that whereas my NGO created the model that is being used now for NASA for its international internships around the space, the space realm for university level students, and Jordan is one of those nations that actually has an agreement with NASA to do that, to send young professionals to intern at NASA. So that would tell me that Jordan's got something that's of interest, obviously, with space. Otherwise, that wouldn't be in motion. So that's all I can say about that. Regarding civil defense or defense spaces, the use
or
of
military
space
or whatever,
for defense, I can't speak to any of that.
Can you speak to anything about their budget?
No. Well, the budget is what they deem, that's something that they would deem of importance, whatever their strategic goals are. The government has the ability to, because it's a constitutional monarchy, each of the emirates have their monarchies that create their own budgets. And so I would imagine that if they decide that they want to do something, then they can allocate the resources to do that. It's all up to what their priorities are and what their mandates are in terms of what they decide they are. So it's freeing in a way. They can decide what to do, and then they can put the budget around it.
No Congress.
I don't know what those budgets are. Yeah.
No Congress critters to deal with.
No Congress critters to deal with, thank God. And so, yeah, it does pave the way. It goes back to, my NGO, the agility that I had in the private sector to do what I could do. If I would have brought this to the government and said, let's do this, I would have been, I would have been encumbered by the government, and I would have had to have, done things differently. And I was wanting to do things that were innovative and timely, and not to say that doesn't happen if you're working with the government, but certainly way back in 14 years ago, these were things that, the market really wasn't up on. And when the market's not educated or interested in something, things tend to go slower, right? So, the UAE can do what it wants, when it wants, and put the money and budget around whatever they choose to. That's all I can say about it.
John is on a roll, so he's got. He's an attorney, so we're going to.
Are you trying to get me in trouble?
We're just going to cut him some slack because he's an attorney. He's probably billing the space show per hour right now. Has it been difficult for you to adjust to the idiosyncrasies of culture with regard to women, or are you insulated from the local culture as a feature of being employed?
Oh, okay. So I'm not employed. That's clear, right? I'm an entrepreneur, so I have to kill my own dinner, so to speak. I have to hunt and kill and then do the dishes after I eat. No. So first of all, my friends and my colleagues in the UAE are largely Emirati, and if they're not, they're Arab. And so I actually don't spend much time with Americans or with Westerners. So I tend to find it very easy to fit in. I lived in Asia for a very long time, and relationships are very important. And being a part of the society that I live in is important to me. And so it's been, it's always different when you're in a different culture. It's not the same, obviously, but I'm used to living overseas, and I tend to fit in and tend to, respect the culture, respect where I am, respect the confines for the most part. Entrepreneurs, of course, push the line sometimes, but, overall, don't break any laws, behave. Those are things that if anyone does those things, it'll serve you well. So as a woman, it really, I think women everywhere, if you want to get into that discussion, John, you're opening a can of worms. Women everywhere have issues, I think. It just depends. Depends on what type of industry you're in, where you are, how you behave, how you carry yourself. I've had a fairly good run in the UAE, and I enjoy it, and I love being there. And
you've adapted to the culture quite well, I take it.
Yes, I don't speak Arabic. If I could go back in time and change one thing, I would probably have studied Arabic. People speak English, and the language in business is largely it's an international marketplace, so the language is largely English. In the law and things like that, it's Arabic. But I'm not a lawyer like John is, so I never needed to learn Arabic. I probably should have or could have wanted to learn Arabic more, but here we are. So.
I have another question for you. Sandra is in Seattle, and she says, since you're fluent in Japanese, I assume you've spent time in Japan. Were you involved or associated with their space program in any way? And can you do compares and contrasts between them, the United States, and the Emirates?
Oh, hi, Sandra. Oh, that's a great question. And I was in Japan. I lived in Japan. That's correct. I lived in Japan in the early 90s, and I have not been back to Japan for 26 years, which is astounding to me because I absolutely love Japan and the Japanese people. I don't know much about JAXA or how they operate, so I really cannot answer your question. I'm very sorry. I wish I could. It's a great question.
And any plans to go back to Japan in the near future?
Yes. I was looking at the Olympics, and with COVID, I'm reevaluating that decision. But if not that, then definitely I have a reunion coming up, and I will definitely go back next year to Japan, providing there's no more catastrophes around the world happening.
Here's another one for you. Paul is in New York, and he says, besides Elon Musk, the other big character here in the United States is Jeff Bezos of Amazon. Does Jeff cross over into the Middle East, and does he have a similar presence or reputation as Elon Musk?
Oh, character. What a good word. So I don't, of course, Amazon and Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Amazon are very, are popular. But, the UAE also, as part of the region, has its own Amazon that they launched a few years back that Amazon, I believe, has sort of merged with or kind of taken over, I believe, unless I'm thinking of Uber. In any case, Amazon is popular as well as AWS is popular. And so it's interesting. AWS is popular in regard to a lot of startups and incubator activity and things like that. And so that's been interesting to see, Jeff Bezos' company, particularly AWS, sort of growing in the region, in Middle East and Africa heavily. I don't see a lot of activity with Blue Origin, but then nor do I see a lot of activity with SpaceX, except I will tell you that SpaceX will be at the Dubai Expo this year. They'll be putting on a display or a demo of some sort at Dubai's Expo. Everyone knows about that, right?
Well,
Dubai,
I know about it, but
what?
I know about it, but maybe my audience doesn't know about it.
The World's Fair, Expo 2020, which has been delayed because of COVID, the World's Fair opens in Dubai in October, and it runs for 6 months until, I believe, April, whatever 6 months is from the time that they open in October. And there will be national pavilions times 193. 193 nations will have their pavilions, is my understanding, at the expo, and they've put and built enormous amounts of infrastructure over the last 9 years getting prepared for this expo. And so SpaceX will have a presence at the U.S. pavilion. I can tell you that. As far as Jeff Bezos' space pursuits, having some exposure or some limelight in the UAE, I haven't seen much of it. I haven't seen that, so I don't know if that answered your question. But.
Well, hopefully it did. If not, they can send in another email. I'm actually getting a couple of emails for you. And listeners, again, it is a talk show, and I bet most of you are not at work. So it'd be really great if you use the phone. There's still plenty of time. 1-866-687-7223. So Roger is in Tucson, Arizona, and Roger says, so the perception is that the area you're talking about tonight is full of sun. So what's the scoop on solar power and their interest possibly in space solar power, and does it power a lot of your electricity?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, the UAE, like I mentioned earlier, the UAE is very far ahead in terms of its gray water recycling and water, using water for energy and using water. I mean, they're able to, this is why, you look at California and you say, why is it that this, tech-heavy California can't figure out how to make drinking water out of the ocean? Because the UAE recycles a lot of its water, and they do an amazing, I mean, you have to look into it. If you don't know much about UAE and its desalination practices and efforts, you really should look into that. It's quite compelling. So that's one area of energy that they use. But they also they do have Masdar, which is it's a university for created probably in 2000 and I'm going to say 4 or 5 or 6. I can't quite remember how long ago it was, but it was back in the day, mid 2000s. The Masdar Institute was created for a place where Emirati and others, they have foreign students as well, that can study all about renewable energy, and it was supposed to be its own contained city that was going to operate all on renewables. And so I imagine that solar is a big part of that. But again, it's not really my forte, and I don't really want to give you a wrong answer. So there's not much more I can speak to about that. But UAE is quite far advanced in terms of being able to use technology for power. The water and power industry. Their DEWA, which is Dubai Electric and Water Authority, and ADWIA, which is the Abu Dhabi Water Electric Authority, are quite advanced in the things that they do for energy. Because as you can imagine, especially Dubai, but now Abu Dhabi is really growing by leaps and bounds too. This is a desert that, there's no water. They built an entire, not only a city, but, I mean, there are areas that just go further and further into the desert every time I go back. If I'm away from Dubai for any length of time and return after even a few months, there's a new city that's popping up somewhere. So, they've really have figured out and cracked the code on how to deal with their energy issues. And I would say look into that if you really want to learn about the answers that are real, because I can't give you those without probably making some errors. But they're compelling. I can guarantee you that much.
You have another question that wants to know if you can tell us the price for a gallon of gasoline in the Emirates.
Well, it's not by gallons, by
it's
liters.
By liter, right?
And so that's a sad subject, because back in the day it used to be very cheap, and I don't really know what the price is. All I could tell you was my car, it took me about the equivalent of $25, $27 maybe, to fill the entire tank. And I don't know how the size of my tank. I had a mid-sized Mercedes, so whatever the size of my tank was, $27 to fill it, and it was, I believe, the octane number is much higher than it is in America. So in America, what is the premium gas? Was it 87?
Well, sometimes it's around low 90s, depending on where you are
okay.
or what state it could be in.
So UAE, I believe, was 95.
Yeah, that's high.
It was very high. I mean, you had to, that's the kind. Of course, that was the only kind of gas that certain cars should, were told they should have.
Right.
But so to put 95, I believe it was 95 back then, in my tank, when I had that car, it was $27. And then when the oil price rose, remember when the price of oil? I'm sorry, when the price of oil tanked. And the price of oil went down, you'd think that, the oil prices have gone down. Well, no, because they're an exporter of oil. And so our prices have risen. And so now it's double that to fill I have a different car now, but it's double that to fill a similar tank size. So the prices have doubled, but that's been, 10, 14 years. They're still far below, imagine, even $50 using 95 octane to fill a tank is not that expensive, actually, right?
Right. Well, I'm paying $50 to fill a Camry. I'm paying $60 in California to fill a Camry at about 16 gallons for the lowest level octane possible.
Yeah, see, so it's a pretty good deal. We get a pretty good deal on, I guess, subsidized oil, I suppose, oil and gas or gasoline. Petrol, it's called petrol.
Petrol. You have another caller waiting. Maybe we'll get back to space here. Hang on. Hi, caller. Welcome to the program tonight. Who are you and where are you, please? Hello.
David, this is John. Am I the one that's on the line here?
Yes, you're live on the show, and that one question you sent in is not to be asked.
Okay.
We don't do that on the space show, John. So I'm not. Okay. We don't pry into people's personal lives. So
okay.
Not going to do that.
Fair enough.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
But what is your question for your call, John? Hello. He misunderstood me.
Maybe we don't want to know if it was.
No. He's listeners. You don't ask guests about really deeply personal things in their life, and I'm not going to allow that on the space show, whether it be this guest or anybody. So, but John, we wanted to hear your question and why you were calling. So if you have a question other than that particular email, either email me back or give us a call back. And there is still time, toll free, 1-866-687-7223. And as soon as I answer the line, you're live on the air. So, John, feel free to call back. It's just that one email was not is not something we do on the space show. Going back to space and to what's happening in the Middle East and kind of what's happening around the world, it seems to be very, very entrepreneurial, at least over here. But we're also seeing things like 3D printing, manufacturing things, not just imaging, but low Earth orbit imaging and ground stations, and all sorts of technologies that are booming. Is that also happening, but maybe at a smaller scale in the Emirates? Do they look to sort of what's happening in the U.S. commercial space market for a guide to inspire them?
Well, I believe, they've got a couple of university programs that have emerged over the last few years where they do an entire program on aerospace or, space-related focus. And so I would imagine that they look at those things from a university perspective. I don't know. I mean, I tend to think that the Space Agency and the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center really have a good list of their own plans and goals, and I'm not sure if they're, chasing around some of these newer things necessarily at this moment. I don't know unequivocally, but I would say that probably some of these bigger things might not be something that they're focused on right now. Not that they couldn't, but certainly I think they've got some big fish to fry, and you've seen, we saw with the Hope probe, they are frying them. They are really, really getting out there and doing what they say they're going to do. And so I think that they're fairly focused. They're fairly strategic-minded in terms of the things that they want to do, and so I would imagine. But in terms of 3D printing and a lot of these technologies and emerging technologies, makers spaces have popped up. And I mentioned to you that the strength of the engineering departments of schools, whether they're K through 12 or whether they are, universities, are stronger than they are in the U.S. for sure. And so they're turning out a lot of very curious and capable and experimenting youth that are doing all kinds of cool things. And so that is growing. The maker spaces are growing, and those are fairly new. They only popped up a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And so, that is something that's starting to happen. There's a lot more of the emerging technologies starting to really be embraced and and they're going in, full steam ahead.
This is a call from Randy, who is in Chicago, and he says, I'm a college student, and one of my activities where I go to school is the Amateur Rocket Club, where we build and launch amateur or hobby rockets. Do they have amateur rocketry in the Middle East, in the areas where you are? Can students launch rockets and do things like that?
Oh, I love that. That sounds great. Randy, are they two-stage rockets, or is that what you're talking about? There are programs, we've had one, and I think there have been a couple of others over the years where they'll bring in NASA educators or such that will do programs for a week or for a summer session where they do build two-stage rockets and launch them, but nothing that's too big or too I want to say crazy, but not in the same sense of the word, but manageable, I suppose. And the same type of thing you would see at a space camp, for example. That kind of rocketry. Is that what you're speaking of, Randy, or is this much more sophisticated?
Well, he didn't say, but it ranges as to what classification your rocket club or your activity is, what range you're able to launch at, what class of motor you're using. So there are very few that make it to space, but some can nowadays, but they're costly and a lot more challenging. And some are two-stage, some are single-stage.
Nothing that would go that far, nothing that would go up.
So it just depends, and then a lot of school programs don't do rocketry, but they specialize in really high balloon flights for their students, and that even goes down to middle school for the balloon flights. So it's pretty popular all across. Yeah, those are great programs.
Yeah, those are great programs. When we were doing a lot of our STEM programming, we used to send. We would bring in NASA and ESA, European Space Agency trainers to do some of our programs, but we also send students from the UAE to our space academies every. We didn't do it during COVID, and we're not doing it this summer, but they'll go to space academies in whether it's Houston or Florida, and they'll do rocketry and things there. And we've even had the rockets launch on the Houston on Johnson Space Center launch pad. They've gone out there and launched them up there and see how far they go. But we were really focused a lot when we were doing our STEM programming on robotics. We did a lot of robotics and Mars rover robotics and different kinds of things that were robotic types of things. But rocketry is very, very exciting, and youth seem to really love it. But I don't see a lot of that going on right now. But again, there's always something going on in the UAE that, it's amazing, the momentum, really.
I got an email from John, the lawyer. So he's sanitizing his question. So he wants to know what space has done for the worldview of the UAE and the region, and he suspects it has really been helpful in modernizing the culture and the perception, but he's asking you how they've benefited from space.
Okay, well, John, UAE is pretty modern without space.
Right. He just doesn't know that, I guess.
Yeah, UAE is a very modern, UAE is a wonderful mix of culture and modernity. And so I think that they didn't need space to make them modern. They are a modern nation, and they are utilizing space like a lot of other countries are to sort of move forward some of their grand plans and their ideas, and at the same time inspiring their national populace to up the ante, I guess you could say. So I don't know how to answer your question, but UAE did not need to use space to modernize itself or to be perceived as modern. Perhaps that's what's happened in some people's minds. Perception is to each his own. And if that's the case, great. But it's a very modern nation, and I think the space activities that they've conducted have proved that. So if anything, I think space has sort of been a driver to sort of a proof of concept, if you will, to show that, this is a nation that's quite modern and quite apt and able to do all kinds of big things.
Do you know if there's a post-Mars mission or Hope probe mission that they're talking about or thinking about? Have you heard anything about what's next?
Well, I know that the UAE Space Agency is looking at doing an Emirates lunar mission.
Oh, cool.
So I can tell you that much. I can't give you any details about it, but that's interesting, right?
Absolutely. Even be more interesting if they were thinking of doing it with people.
Yeah, manned space flight. I think it was a question asked by Sandra in Seattle, perhaps, human space flight, and I didn't quite answer, I don't think. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think human space flight, just in terms of the astronauts and possibly the tourism, I believe that there are dozens of Emirati UAE nationals who have purchased seats on Virgin Galactic or possibly, Shepherd, Blue Origin, called Shepherd?
The New Shepard, the New Shepard, which is a suborbital tourism vehicle, right? Yeah.
So, I don't know what they're going to do with these missions. I doubt they're going to be manned at first, but who knows? I mean, things are moving at a rapid speed. I mean, you look at how fast things are going in the space industry now, and it's quite compelling. I mean, if someone would have asked you a year ago if the ISS would have been sending back to Earth its astronauts aboard a private sector vehicle, would we have thought that would have been the case?
Would not likely have happened.
Right?
Absolutely.
So things are moving very quickly, and never say never.
Would you be interested in being a space tourist?
I have no desire to do something like that. It's funny, isn't it? I'm perfectly happy with my feet on the ground, which is really counter to much of my personality. But for some reason, I'm happy to hear stories and see videos and hear about, firsthand accounts of what it was like. So I'm kind of an anomaly, I guess, in that regard. Everyone else says, yes, absolutely. So I'll leave more space for others. How about that? I'll get out of the way and leave more space for others.
We talked about doing a 60-minute program, so we're a little bit longer. Have we omitted something? Have we forgotten something? Should we have brought something up that you wanted to tell us or share with us? You're actually the first guest in program that we've talked about the UAE and space and space in the Middle East in some detail. So you got a lot of ground-oriented initial questions. I think if you come back as a guest, it'd probably be a little bit more advanced. But people don't know a whole lot. As you can tell, we're thirsty for information.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would be happy to give you some others that are from the UAE that would be great to answer these questions because they could speak for the UAE, whether it's the space agency or whether it's the Mohammed Rashid Space Center in Dubai or whether it's one of the NASA research fellows. I'd be happy to connect you to others who can speak to the questions that maybe your audience wants to know and learn that I can't
that you can't
fulfill.
Well, I'd certainly follow up with that, and I'd be happy to talk to them. In their home country. I'm assuming they have pretty good telephone communications since they can get to ours.
Yes, of course. Again, highly advanced and in some cases better than ours. I also, will mention the IAC, the International Astronautical Congress. I believe your listeners should definitely know what that is.
Right. And many attend it, yeah.
Yeah, right. The IAC is taking place in Dubai this year, and it's taking place late October, towards the end of the month of October. And that was just confirmed that, in fact, they're going forward with that, and it's going to be in person and probably a hybrid but definitely open for business. And so that happens at the end of October, and that's in Dubai. And I definitely, it's an hour drive between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which is not too far, but there are some COVID restrictions right now that are different between the two Emirates, quite different. But I would hope by October things are not going to be that worrisome when it comes to COVID. But Dubai would be something for people who are interested in space and engaged in space. Hopefully they show up. And it's a great time because there's expos happening as well. It's a 2-for-1.
2-for-1. Was COVID bad in the Emirates? Did they have a serious problem with it?
Yeah, the Emirates has been marked by State Department as a reconsider travel category, highest category. Although I don't find it to be that worrisome. But the statistics were 3 times worse than New York in terms of percentage, right? So I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about the percentages of people who were infected and who died, for example. So
okay,
the severity.
Right.
Severity, percentage of population, per capita severity was worse. But it doesn't feel like it. And they're they take a lot of precautions. And you've got to be tested before you get there, and sometimes they'll test you again on arrival. And not only do you wear a mask and social distance, but many places require rubber gloves.
Oh, really?
So they're very cautious. They're very cautious and very clean, and they take a lot of precautions. And so I don't find it doesn't feel like there's any danger. I should say it doesn't feel like it. Anyway,
do people get vaccinated, or do they resist the vaccination?
Yes, and good question, great question, David. And I think that actually that's another statistic. The UAE might be the number 1 nation in the world. Might be. You'd have to research this. In terms of population vaccinations, it might be number 1 right now. A large portion of the population has been vaccinated, so. Do the research on that. I don't quote me, but I do think that they are way ahead of the curve. The other thing is there are only a few nations that are open right now for Americans. Those people listening who are American, if you are planning to travel this summer and finally get away and get out of the house, there are only a few nations that are open to Americans. UAE is one of a few nations in the Middle East and Asia region, and UAE is one of them. Bahrain is one of them, and Thailand is one of them. Sri Lanka is one of them, and Nepal is one of them. So there are very few. There are less than a half dozen probably that are open for Americans now. And so if you're making summer travel plans, think of the UAE. But going in October is a really good bang for your buck because you're going to have a lot of things going on in October.
Okay. This has been a great conversation, and thank you very much for sharing your time with us. I would love to talk to other people involved with space in the region. So anybody you can refer or help me meet or anything, I'm all ears and all microphone. And I hope we can talk again down the road, and when new things happen and additional work that you're doing comes to the forefront that we should know about, it would be good to bring you back on. So keep me posted, please.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time and for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. And listeners, that's going to be it for tonight. And so I thank those of you who emailed us and those of you who called. And again, if you can see the lunar eclipse and the blood red moon tonight and you don't mind getting up really, really early, go take care of that and look at it and report back on an open line show what you saw. We'd love to hear your report. We want to thank Lisa for being with us tonight, all of you who called, all of you who emailed. The week is young, so have a great week and a great holiday weekend coming up after that. And stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, keep looking up. Good night from Lisa, David, and the Space Show.